taken away, she could not do anything.
They were saying like that.
Yes. Such a bad thing happened in Bangladesh.
Exactly.
Thousands of idols were beheaded, and what a bad thing. Okay.
And people had been killed.
Killed
And it was
also. They attacked Ramakrishna Mission, then ISKCON, and all
ISKCON.
temples. I think
Even
this is like the end of rationality in some part of the
exactly,
world. I think Taliban have really invaded mentally everywhere.
I think so,
Yeah.
because even in Rangpur, almost Rangpur is North Bengal.
Yeah.
In almost 12 or 13 places
Yes. In Komila.
in Komila,
Rangpur.
it started, and then Noakhali, then
Yes. Noakhali was the means target.
uh,
That ISKCON was the target.
ISKCON was the target. Ratikant.
नमस्ते सर नमस्कार
Namaskar, Rati. Kemti acho? How are
सर भल
you?
सर भल सर
Okay, good. So, how was Durga Puja celebration in Bombay?
sir it was there but we did not go it was not
Okay. Yes, yes.
still we are inside
Yeah.
and take vacation.
Ranjan has joined.
Ranjan had joined.
Yes, namaskar. Sorry, I was in another meeting. We had a department presentation of some project.
Okay. Who was presenting?
This was an MA PhD program project, sir. Some
Okay.
students used to present. Gilad has joined, I think.
Who has joined?
Gilad.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, hello. Welcome. He is one of our speakers, sir.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good to see you all.
Yeah, good to see you.
You are joining from which place, Mr. Gil?
Yeah, I live in Leipzig, in Germany.
Okay, Leipzig. Okay, good, very good.
I think there might have been a mistake in the email. It said that we start at 11 British time, but I think it should have said 11:30, right? We're starting in 4 minutes.
Is it? I don't think I had given only one time.
Sir, Vikrant shared a reminder, I think. So he, Indian time he wrote correctly, but I think he made a mistake in writing GMT.
I see. Sorry for that, Glad. Yes.
No problem. I relied on the Indian time, not the British.
Mostly we have this lecture on Saturday and at 4 o'clock. So, but today it was Professor Sarkar was thought it will be okay and to have it today. Yeah. Just a minute. Professor Ghosh has also joined today. Namaskar, Professor Ghosh.
Namaskar. Thank you.
So, I think we will shortly start. Ananta Bhai has joined. Ananta Bhai, namaskar.
Hello, namaskar, Ranjan, and all friends.
Namaskar. Anand Babu, namaskar.
Namaskar, namaskar. केमती अछंती
हाँ ठीक अच्छी आपण केमती अछंती
ଭଲ ଅଛି Professor Pradhan, so nice to meet with you here.
Nice to meet you.
So, I think we should start. No?
Yes, sir.
Ankita. Today, Ankita will introduce and invite the guest.
Yes, sir. Good evening.
Yeah, please start, Ankita.
A very good evening to all. I welcome you all on behalf of Forum for Philosophy to its Centenary lecture series on the Tractatus. The speaker for today's session is Professor Priyambada Sarkar. Welcome, ma'am. The session will be chaired by Professor R.C. Pradhan. Welcome, sir. Professor Sarkar is a professor of philosophy at the Department of Philosophy, University of Calcutta, West Bengal, India. Her research interests include, but are not limited to, philosophy of language, Wittgenstein, analytic philosophy, and ethics. Professor Sarkar has authored several books, book chapters, and journal articles. Her latest book is Language, Limits, and Beyond, Early Wittgenstein and Rabindranath Tagore, published by the Oxford University Press in 2021. The title for today's talk is At the Threshold of Language and Meaning, Early Wittgenstein and Rabindranath Tagore. Professor Sarkar, it's an honor to have you with us today and to have this opportunity to listen to your insights. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I'm really thankful and grateful to the organizers on behalf of Forum for Philosophy for inviting me to share my thoughts with the learned audience. And I also would like to thank Professor R.C. Pradhan, leading Wittgensteinian philosopher in India, who has kindly consented to chair the session. And I wish the forum a great success. It's doing a great job, I think. Thank you all. Now, to begin with, I think it's already known. It's widely known to the scholars of Wittgenstein that in the summer of 1927, Maurice Slick invited Wittgenstein to come to Vienna Circle meetings. At that time, members of the Vienna Circle, they were under the impression that Tractatus is a book on logical positivism, and Wittgenstein is a staunch logical positivist. So they were very keen to invite Wittgenstein into their circle meetings. Wittgenstein was reluctant at first, and then he consented on the condition that he will talk on whatever he likes, not on any particular chosen topic. Slick agreed, and Wittgenstein came to the meetings. But at the time, as I said, that members were very eager to learn more about, as you all know, Tractatus is very cryptic, to know more about the tenets of the Tractatus. And Frederick Weissmann was doing his PhD. So they really had many questions on the Tractatus. When they asked Wittgenstein, he clearly resented. He didn't want to answer them. And he turned his back on the audience and started reciting poems from Gitanjali of Rabindranath Tagore. So this is something, when I came to know about this, when I read it, it struck. I was thinking, I was wondering, how could a philosopher in the tradition of Frege and Russell could be fascinated by a mystical poet, the greatest mystical poet of India. Could there be anything in their ideas or attitudes which are similar? Now, W. Bartley and Ray Monk, in their biographies, they had written clearly that Wittgenstein had fascination for Tagore's poems, and he had special liking for the play The King of the Dark Chamber. And in fact, he even began translating The King of the Dark Chamber because he thought that the original translation was not capable of expressing the deeper religious significance of the play. So he got into translating this play. Now, on May 2017, this translation has been published in Wittgenstein's Royal Lectures, notes from Yorick Smithies, and one can see he could not complete it. It's unfinished, but he started doing this. So I think that there must be some overlaps between the philosophies of these two geniuses. Now, the works of Tagore and Wittgenstein are generally considered to be of seminal importance in the respective fields. Tagore in the field of literature and Wittgenstein in the field of philosophy. They are conventionally seen as having studied separately. Not only that, there's another difficulty. Tagore was reluctant to be treated as a philosopher. He said, I'm a poet. I'm not a philosopher. Don't call me a philosopher. Whereas Wittgenstein was a highly acclaimed philosopher of the analytic tradition. So the question might rise in your minds, then why compare a poet and a philosopher? Doesn't it sound like the comparison between chalk and cheese? Now, what I want to emphasize in this lecture is that in spite of their differences, there are significant similarities of structure in Wittgenstein and Tagore as far as the notion of language and its limits are concerned. So now there'll be some slides. Can you see it?
No, you have to share the screen. I think that sharing screen option has gone now.
Where is it?
Ma'am, you have to present it again. Earlier, the screen was being presented. Now it has stopped. So you present it again, and then we will be able to see it.
Oh. Oh.
There's an arrow, Priyambada, there's an arrow showing on the on your screen. So you press the arrow and there is an option, share screen. So you can share the screen there, I think.
Arrow.
CC arrow. There's the microphone, there's the video, then CC, there's an arrow also.
Oh, yes.
So okay.
Yes, right. Thank you. Now you can see it.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the inconvenience. Now, so we have done our introduction. Now we will come. First, we'll learn what Wittgenstein has said in the Tractatus about language and its limits. Now, the first thing in the preface of the book, he clearly states that what he wants to do in the book, in the Tractatus, is to draw a limit to thought. Now, drawing a limit to thought is impossible, is not logically possible, because if you want to draw a boundary to thought, then both sides of the thought will be thinkable. Then we will have to think the unthinkable. So we cannot really draw a boundary to thought, but a boundary to thought can be drawn via drawing a boundary on the limits of language. Because in language, we can distinguish between the sensible language and what is not sensible, what is expressible in language and what is not. Setting a limit to thought was the ultimate project of the Tractatus, which is logically impossible, since to draw a boundary on thought would lead one to think the unthinkable. But one can set a limit to thought only if he can set a limit to language, by distinguishing what can be sensibly expressed in language and what cannot be. This will, in effect, draw a limit to thought, since language and thought are coextensive in the domain of the sensible. To Wittgenstein of the Tractatus, an expression is sensible if and only if it pictures a particular state of affair of the world. Hence, expressions which are not descriptions of states of affairs, then they cannot be expressed in sensible language. And Wittgenstein's advice is that if you cannot express it in sensible language, you better be silent. It is better to not to talk about them, but to pass them over in silence. He says it in the preface and in the conclusion, in the last paragraph of the book. He says that what can be said clearly, and what we cannot talk about, it can be, we should pass it over in silence. Now, Herein lies the similarity between a poem and the Tractatus. In a poem, everything is not stated. One has to grasp or feel what is not stated by looking at what is stated. Wittgenstein, in his letter to his friend Ludwig von Ficker, he declared that the work is strictly philosophical and at the same time literary. In fact, he wanted to publish it in a literary journal called Der Brenner. And then again, in Culture and Value, he says that the philosophy should be composed in the way in which a work of literature is. So what are the, why is he saying all these things, that the philosophy should be done in the manner a work of literature is written? Because poets often emphasize on symbols, suggestions, and metaphoric meanings. They believe that most of the time, the value of language lies in its being non-discursive. In the Tractatus, we find that there are certain important things which cannot be stated in factual language, but they manifest themselves in what is being said. So what links his Tractatus with works of literature is the kind of demand that Wittgenstein places on readers, that they respond to what is not there, that they respond to what is inexpressible, insensible language. He even wrote to his friend that what he has not written in the book, what he could not write in the book, is the most important thing. However, before we move on with our project of finding parallels of Wittgenstein's thinking with that of Tagore, we should explore the relationship of Tagore to people of Germany in 1920s. Now, in 1913, Tagore was awarded Nobel Prize, and by 1920, Wittgenstein's Tagore's writings were available in German translation. I'll just give a list. It's still 1927, and look at the number of works that had been translated and published in Germany. Even the craze was something like this, that whatever he was delivering, even to his school students, that also was getting translated in various languages, and it had been published by important publishers. Tagore had visited Germany for quite a few times, but his visits in 1921, 22, 26, and 1930 are especially significant because during this period, he was literally swayed by the frenzied ovations of the people of Germany. In 1922, Tagore's 61st birthday was celebrated in Germany with much enthusiasm and ovation. The publication of his work, 8 volumes in 1922, and its success were evidence of Tagore mania in Germany. Martin Kempchen used the word Tagore mania. Against this background, you can see in the slide that 1921 there was a sale of 1 million copies of Tagore books, and people really they were, whatever had been published in the name of Tagore, it had been published. Against this background, one can imagine why Wittgenstein had admired the poems of Tagore. when he recited poems of Tagore to the members of Vienna Circle, the reason does not seem to me to be casual or non-deliberate. Rather, I think Raymond is right when he says that when he points out that what he had not said in the Tractatus was more important than what he had said. Wittgenstein perhaps thought that reading these poems could be an effective form of teaching them the essence of the Tractatus. Like what we cannot speak of, we must pass over in silence, the fundamental tenet of the Tractatus. This can be conveyed by reciting poems from Tagore, something which is constitutive of the most fundamental point of similarity between the poet and the philosopher. In the midst of their legitimate differences, there are differences, they belong to two different modernities, their approaches were different, but in spite of those differences, there are similarities, fundamental similarities. We will talk about them talk about them elaborately later. Now, the important thing, both Tagore and Wittgenstein agreed to the fact that there are limits to rational thought and language, but neither is content to accept the limits of reasoned discussion as ultimate. Like they believe that language has limits. We cannot express everything by means of sensible language, but that is not the ultimate thing. They believe that there is a beyond that is inexpressible. And the distinction between what is expressible in sensible language and what is not form the central focus of their respective philosophies. Now, coming to the Tractatus again. Tractatus, what he wanted to do? He wanted to draw a boundary on thought, which could not be done, but drawing a boundary to thought is possible via the boundary on language. So he drew a boundary on the expressions of language. So he distinguished between sense and nonsense. Language and propositions constitute the language. So propositions can be sensible or non-sensible. Now, sensible propositions, what are the sensible propositions? Now, according to Tractatus, a proposition is sensible if and only if it pictures a particular state of affairs of the world. From this, it follows that those propositions which are not descriptions of the world, which do not picture anything of the world, which do not mirror any events of the world, they are nonsensible. And then again, under the head of nonsensible, we have, on the one hand, senseless, that is propositions of logic and mathematics. They do not say anything directly about the world. They are abstract disciplines, they are abstract discourses. They don't picture any events of the world, so they are senseless. And there are others also where what is not expressible in sensible language, still philosophers attempt to express those inexpressibles, and that results in nonsense. And under this heading comes ethics, aesthetics, religion, metaphysics, and even Tractatus. The diagram shows what lies within the domain of sensible are empirical propositions, which constitutes the world as totality of facts. On the other hand, a priori propositions, like propositions of logic and mathematics, propositions of non-factual discourses like ethics, aesthetics, metaphysics, religion, and even Tractatus fall within the domain of nonsensible. They are nonsensical because they are not pictures of the world. But that doesn't mean that they are insignificant. They are important as they manifest the structure and the limit of language, thought, and reality. It is important to note that early Wittgenstein treated logic, ethics, aesthetics, metaphysics, religion as something higher and of transcendental value. Although these discourses are nonsense according to his criteria of language and meaning of the Tractatus, that doesn't mean that he like Hume, he would have meant that committed to the flames. No, it was not his attitude. He respected these discourses because he said that this is also an excerpt from a letter. No, this is from Lecture on Ethics. That these are nonsensical, but this nonsensicality is their very essence. And whoever wanted to talk about ethics or religion or metaphysics, they run against the boundaries of language. And he said that you can see that he respected deeply this tendency in human mind to go beyond the limits. And he could never ridicule it. So these, whatever he termed as nonsense, he did not mean that they are insignificant or they are useless, but he thinks that this is something which is important, which is respectable, but as nonsensicality is their very essence, we cannot but designate them as nonsense. Now, there's one problem. And commentators, they are really puzzled to solve this problem. This is called the riddle of the Tractatus. The riddle of the Tractatus is how to assimilate his account of logic and language with the account of his Das Mystisch, the mystical of the Tractatus. The mystical, the nonsense under which comes ethics, aesthetics, religion, metaphysics, and even Tractatus. How to incorporate the ethical with the logical? How to assimilate the logical and the ethical? What are the connections? In a diary, in one of his diaries in 1916 July, he's thinking about it. He's worrying about it. Have thought a lot about everything possible. But strangely enough, I cannot establish the connection with my mathematical lines of thought. But the connection will be established. What cannot be said cannot be said. Wittgenstein did find the connection in the realm of the unsayable but showable. This is the domain of the nonsensible. They are nonsensical. We cannot express them sensibly, So they are unsayable, but they manifest themselves, they show themselves. So the connection between these two domains, the logical and the ethical, the logical and the mystical, through this, what the Tractatus attempts to manifest via these statable propositions is, however stringent the distinction between facts and values are, however contingent the facts of the world are, they somehow manifest the necessary, the sublime. That is, apparently it seems he begins the book with the description of the world as the totality of facts. And this totality of facts, this world has no place for values, because values are higher, they are transcendental. So on the one hand, there is this world of contingent world where there is no place for values. On the other hand, there are values in a separate domain. He used the word transcendental even in the Tractatus. But now, at the same, we'll see as we progress, these two domains are not mutually exclusive. He connected these two domains via this notion of showing, via this notion of what cannot be said can be shown. It can be manifested. It can be manifested in the world of facts. So the distinction between there are distinction between facts and values, and the facts of the world are contingent. Still, the facts of the world manifest the necessary, the sublime, the valuable. This world and life are not totally insignificant or devoid of values for early Wittgenstein. As the significant and the insignificant, the necessary and the contingent, the sublime and the trivial are intertwined with each other. The doctrine of showing reveals in an indirect way what is not in the world, hence cannot be represented in the language. Thus, the Tractatus is an attempt to show the limits of language and meaning. The scientific language in the Tractatus is limited, bounded by the totality of elementary propositions. But the matter does not end here. The Tractatus wants to convey through language its boundary, its limits, and also, in a paradoxical sense, a glimpse of what lies on the other side of the boundary. What lies on the other side of the boundary, that is ethical, aesthetical, religious, metaphysical, and the mystical, eludes our ordinary scientific language. So we have learned about language and its limits in the Tractatus. Now we'll come to Tagore's view of language and its limits. Tagore in his writings had talked about two different uses of language. One is pragmatic and descriptive use of everyday language, and another is the creative use reflected in the language of art, literature, music, and religion. For him, the language of science or knowledge must be as clear as possible. The right word must bear its exact meaning. But in the poetic language, the language of feeling is, to some extent, inexplicit. Wittgenstein also believed that poems can look beyond the threshold of factual language and manifest the unutterable in an indirect manner. In Tagore, we find the distinction between the expressible and the inexpressible, byakto and obyakto. In ontology, we can find him elucidating the distinction between fact and truth and between different uses of language. In ontology, Tagore distinguishes between fact and truth. Now, it's really interesting to find out similarities as far as the definition of fact is concerned. Now, as I have translated the fact, definition of fact in Tagore, a fact is the characterization of the way things exist. Like if the things, if the existing thing is S is P, a fact is that S is P. So it is a characterization of the way the things exist. And Wittgenstein in the Tractatus 1.13, a fact is an existent state of affairs. And Tagore says, one can examine an object apart by reference to facts. Wittgenstein also said, a picture agrees with reality or fails to agree. It is correct or incorrect, true or false. That is, by comparison with the state of affairs, we can describe the picture as being true or as being false. So we can find that there are some similarities in Tagore and Wittgenstein as far as the notion of fact is concerned. Now, this fact is similar to Wittgenstein defines fact in the a fact is something which is objective, which is impersonal, and which becomes the base of our scientific discourse and intersubjective communication. Because a fact is a fact of the world. A fact states how the objects exist, how the state of affairs exist or do not exist. So our discussion suggests that there are close affinities between the views of the early Wittgenstein and Tagore as far as facts are concerned. But the notion of truth seems to be different. The notion of truth, as Tagore explains in his writings, apparently seems to be far away from the views of Wittgenstein. To Tagore, truth goes beyond the domain of facts in the sense that it is personal and subjective. His view will be clear if I quote an incident of his life. I had a servant whose looks or intelligence were hardly worthy of notice. He would go home at night, return the next morning, and go about his chores with a dusting cloth on his shoulder. I registered the fact of his presence on the day he did not turn up. That morning, I found the water had not been drawn for my bath, the rooms had not been swept. He showed up around 10 in the morning. I asked in a rather brusque voice, "Where were you all the time?" He said, "My daughter died last night." And he promptly picked up the dusting cloth and went quietly to work. My heart stopped for a moment. The veil of necessity that had covered the servant was lifted, revealing a father. Myself discovered its likeness with his. He became a perceptible presence, something distinctive. That day, at the touch of the rusher of compassion, that rustic man was united with the self that dwells in my heart. Beyond the bounds of need, on the plane of imagination, Momin Mia, his name was Momin Mia, Momin Mia became real for me. Now, Tagore treated the ultimate truth. It is the truth of relationship. It is the truth of harmony in the universe. Here, the truth of relationship was veiled at the beginning, was veiled by the necessity, by the distinction between master and servant. But actually, the veil was lifted, and he realized that as a father, they are the same, they are related. Momin Mia is the father of a daughter, and Tagore also is father of a daughter. As daughter's father, there is no distinction between them. So there is relationship, there is harmony. Myself discovered its likeness with his as father. So that rustic man was united with the self that dwells in my heart. So he was not a servant. He was not someone belonging to a different community, belonging to a different religion. He's someone who dwells in his heart. He's one with that Momin Mia. So that is the truth of relationship and the truth of harmony. He thinks that it can be grasped only if we rise above the domain of facts, which is limited with the bounds of space, time, objectivity, necessity, and other categories. Now, what happens when one rises above the domain of facts? How can one rise above the domain of facts and embrace the truth? For Tagore, when we rise above the domain of facts, we can catch hold of the Supreme One which resides in our own inner selves. We can feel that there is the union of our own inner world with the outside world. The way he felt himself identical with the grieved father. He elucidates, we feel happy when we see a rose. We see the beauty and harmony in color, smell, contour that is in the form of a flower. Now, the unity which we find residing in color, smell, petals of a rose is the same unity that resides in inner core of the world. The music of the world finds affinity with the tune of the rose. For Tagore, a scientist deals with facts and an artist apprehends truth. Scientist deals with facts because scientist needs an impersonal principle. Otherwise, one cannot learn science, one cannot teach science if there is no impersonal principle of unification. And they always seek an impersonal principle of unification, which can be applied to all things. In contrast, the artist finds out the unique, the individual, which is yet in the heart of the universal. Because the artist apprehends the truth. And what is the truth? Truth of relationship, truth of harmony. Now, a scientist can make known what he has learned by analysis, by experiment. But what an artist has to say, he cannot express by information or by explanation. You have to feel it. You have to test it. You cannot simply, it is not a piece of information. When an artist draws pictures, he does not want to give us information. That is, if the picture possesses the beauty of the harmony of color, painting, drawing, and music, then our heart recognizes it as real or true. But if it does not have the harmony, then however accurate facts are represented, it will be rejected by an artist as it fails to capture the truth. Like in art, we do not like a very good photography. Photography itself is an art. Otherwise, a good picture is not always a good art, good piece of art. While elucidating, Tagore gave an example of a doctor who treats his own ailing son impersonally as a human body. Otherwise, he cannot operate on his son. And Tagore concludes that he can have only scientific knowledge of his son's body, but not the realization of truth. So, how can the doctor have realization of truth? He can realize the truth only in his intimate feeling for his son. He touches an ultimate truth, the truth of relationship, the truth of harmony in the universe, the fundamental principle of creation. So I try to distinguish between fact and truth in accordance with Tagore, as far as Tagore's ontology is concerned. And epistemology also, epistemology, science and art. Like science deals with facts and art deals with the truth. Now we'll come to the relationship. What is the relationship? Are they two different domains? Are they mutually exclusive? For Tagore, no, they are not mutually exclusive. They are related. It's true that truth is indescribable directly, as factual scientific language is incompetent to describe the whole truth. But truth manifests itself. Truth gets manifested in art, literature, music, and dance. Here, representation is not factual, but here representation is through the notion of suggestiveness, indirection, and bending of meaning, which happens in cases of prose, poems, painting, drawing, sculpture. Now he says that truth, how truth is expressed. He's giving an analogy. Truth is expressed when the finiteness of form, like a lamp, lights up the flame of the infinite. Fact is finite, truth is infinite. Fact is like a lamp, so it can light up. The light is infinite, the flame of the infinite. So in Tagore, there is no riddle concerning how to reconcile the finite and the infinite. They yearn to manifest and be manifested by each other, and their harmony constitutes truth. And Tagore also says that this truth, this ultimate truth, truth of relationship, this is also beyond description or narration in terms of factual or scientific language. So that is why silence plays an important role in the philosophies of Tagore and Wittgenstein. The mode of silence forms the important key theme in the poems of Tagore. Now I'll come to the last phase of my lecture. This is the similarities in the structure of their arguments. Now, although it is not explicitly stated anywhere in Tagore's writings that science falls within the domain of sayable in terms of facts, still it is obviously so. Same is the case with art, ethics, aesthetics, and religion, which are also unsayable in factual terms, but they are showable. One can easily notice the distinction between saying and showing implicit in the distinction between fact and truth, science and art, expressible and inexpressible, bhakto and abhakto. It is surprising to note over here that Tagore was keen on making this distinction in early 1920s. We can see that both the poet and the philosopher believed that facts are incapable of expressing truth, and they both used almost the same analogy while describing it. Now, I quoted from Tagore's personality. It was lectures delivered in USA. Probably in 1921, he delivered these lectures in USA in English. It's collected in the book called book named Personality. Here, Tagore is saying that facts are inadequate tools for the expression of truth. Facts are limited. Facts are finite. They are like wine cups that carry it. They are hidden by it. It overflows them. Truth overflows them. Now, Wittgenstein, in his lecture on ethics given in 1929, he's saying, our words will only express facts as a teacup will only hold a teacup full of water, and if I were to pour out a gallon over it, so it overflow. If I pour a gallon of water on a teacup, it will overflow. So this is something you can see. Now, regarding art, Tagore valued art as an expression of truth. We mentioned that artist apprehends truth, and art is an expression of truth, more than science. And so does Wittgenstein. In a letter to Engelmann, Wittgenstein admits that only the work of art compels us to see it in the right perspective. And this is one, this is a paragraph, a sentence within a paragraph, Tractatus 6.421, and which is really cryptic. There are lots and lots of commentaries where he says that ethics and aesthetics are one. And the same thing we can find in Tagore, that he writes clearly, beauty cannot be the aim of art and literature unless it is good. Goodness has made beauty more than something to be seen with the eye. So beauty, aesthetics, and good is ethics. Ethics, aesthetics, and logic. These three, they are in a way identical in the philosophy of Tagore, and we can see in Wittgenstein also. Logic, ethics, aesthetics all come under the head of non-sensible, and they are the conditions of the world. They are not facts of the world, they are the conditions of the world, and they make things possible. So here also we find, and then again, both of them were skeptical about the idea of progress and science. Wittgenstein expressed his worry that the advancement of science and technology will marginalize ethics and the arts and thereby endanger the human spirit. Tagore also says that science sets up an impersonal and unalterable standard of space and time, and it disturbs the reality of the world, gets disturbed by science. And he also said something against the technological progress, both of them. And both Tagore and Wittgenstein wanted to stress the importance of what cannot be expressed in sensible language, of which we should remain silent. For both, remaining silent plays an important role in their respective discourses, although each has a unique approach to arriving at the same conclusion, Tagore through literature and Wittgenstein through logic. And both of them rely on indirect method of communication, where straightforward communication becomes impossible, like through poems. Like, as I did not have time, I could not refer to Wittgenstein's reference to a poem, to an analysis of the poem. to elucidate the domain of the inexpressible for early Wittgenstein and Tagore incorporates ethics, aesthetics, metaphysics, religion, and other discourses, still it can somehow be manifested in the domain of facts by suggestiveness of language, by indirection, by bending of meanings through poems, music, drawing, painting. In fact, this parallel of methodology shows that there are important connections between the poet and the philosopher, which is striking. But it has been overlooked in the history of secondary literature on Wittgenstein. And I think many more works can be done on this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sarkar. Thank you so much. So now I would request Professor Pradhan to give his remarks, and then we will have the discussion.
Thank you, Professor Panda. And thank you, Professor Sarkar, for your excellent deliberations on the relationship between Wittgenstein and Tagore. It was very fascinating to know the details about some of these connections, especially how Wittgenstein was reading Tagore's poems from the Gitanjali in the Vienna Circle meeting. Apart from these details, what is most striking is the fact that you have, in your discourse, brought these two apparently different thinkers, one poet and the other a philosopher, a logician, together. So you have really built up a platform where both can converse with each other. Though there are certain points in which they differ, such as the notion of truth. If Wittgenstein would have redefined the concept of truth, then he could have said there is scientific truth, which is objective, impersonal, but there is also non-scientific truth, or a metaphysical truth, or a transcendental truth, which could be personal, as Tagore will say. Though the word subjective may be misleading, but the word personal will be appropriate. It is personal truth. It is spiritual truth, really, for Tagore. In that incident, when he empathed had compassion with his servant who had lost his daughter, it was spiritual communion between the two apparently different personalities. That was the commonness between one man and the other. That is the spiritual bond between man and one man with another man. So that is perhaps you would have called it a spiritual truth. So anyway, both have agreed on the fact that scientific truth is not all. And that is the message which Tractatus has given. That's why he says that when scientific questions are being answered or scientific problems are being solved, then the problems of life remain untouched. That is enough indication of the fact that for Wittgenstein, science or scientific language is not the ultimate item of discussion for the philosopher. The philosopher is not a scientist. The philosopher is not bound by the language of science. So philosopher can have the option of a poet to go back to what is inexpressible. So Professor Sarkar has really emphasized this aspect of it. Unfortunately, many of the commentators forget the fact that Wittgenstein was so concerned about the inexpressible, the so-called mystical. Only the hardcore positivists and the hardcore logically minded philosophers will not empathize with Wittgenstein. This happened with Russell. That's why Wittgenstein said that Russell never understood his Tractatus, though Russell wrote an elaborate introduction to the Tractatus. But that, apart from that, what Professor Sarkar has really done, and that is an eye opener for all of us that the philosopher is also a poet. Wittgenstein was a poet at heart. One can use the word mystic to suggest that he was a mystic at heart, though not in the Tractatus, because he wrote about so much about logic and language. So, but he was at heart a poet, a mystic, a religious man, perhaps, though many people express doubt. But in the true sense of the religion, he was religious. Because he said somewhere that he could not help himself looking at the problems from a religious point of view. So that speaks of highly of his religious bent of mind. So these are the points which Professor Sarkar has really opened before us for discussion. And without taking much time, I must congratulate Professor Sarkar for her excellent, detailed, and very, very ably argued for her case that Tagore and Wittgenstein must meet. They have met, but they must meet now for those who try to understand Wittgenstein. Tagore, we may know Indians, but for Indians, anybody can understand Tagore if he goes through his Gitanjali. Tractatus is a different cup of tea. Tractatus is not always as easy as any book of poems. So it is really heartening to know that Professor Sarkar has done the right job of drawing attention to the unwritten part of the Tractatus, which Wittgenstein was so vociferous about. That the unwritten part of the Tractatus is more important than the written part. And Professor Sarkar has highlighted that point. So really, it was an excellent lecture, and we must all congratulate her. But now we must also put questions to her. So I have no questions. If I have questions, I will come later. Other ask questions. Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Sir. Any question? Uh, Professor Ghosh, Ranjit Ghosh. Yeah, please.
Uh, at the first instance, I must congratulate Professor Sarkar for giving such a interface between the East and the West in the form of Tagore and Wittgenstein. Now, there are certain things which about which I need some clarification. Now, I also accept Professor Pradhan's view that in Tagore, Tagore, we don't find the religious, we find the spiritual, because Tagore was a pantheist. So we have to find out whether Wittgenstein was an atheist in the strict sense of the term, or he was a pantheist. So so that our discussion of mysticism in Tagore vis-a-vis Wittgenstein will make sense. Another thing is this, that in Tagore's Gitanjali, we find a type of nature mysticism, because Tagore was not a believer in God. So, this type of environmental approach, or its manifestation, whether it is to be traceable in the philosophy of Wittgenstein in some of his writings, Professor Pradhan can enlighten us on this issue. So these two things I have just tried to, you can say, extrapolate rather on the discussion of Professor Sarkar. Thank you.
Professor Sarkar, please unmute. Yeah.
Yes, sir. I think she got disconnected.
She got
joined back.
disconnected. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe by mistake she clicked on it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, yes, he has joined.
Sorry for all this trouble.
No issue, no issue, absolutely no issue. Yeah, please share your.
Uh,
Uh,
so I was asking, I'm trying from a different device. Now I was asking, shall I respond to him now? Like
Yes, please.
Professor
Please
Ghosh,
respond. You may
I
subject
think
later.
yeah,
uh,
please. Yeah.
your second question or comments was regarding the spirituality of Tagore and Wittgenstein. As far as mysticism is concerned, yes, I have dealt with them elaborately in my book, Language Limits and Beyond. And there, I have researched on this, and I was really astounded to find similarities. In both the in both the cases, like both of them, they were in sort of, they were against institutionalization. Like they were not, like, we cannot really term Tagore as a Brahmo, because um, he was not in that sense we called, as he was in his earlier times when he was the secretary of Adi Brahmo Samaj, but later he was disillusioned, and then at some period of his time he was attached to Hindu dharma. Like in Shantiniketan, there was the tradition, like students used to bow down to only Brahmin teachers, and only namaskaras to others who are not Brahmins. And when people asked Rabindranath for this distinction, then he said that whatever is there in the Samhitas, it will be observed in my school. So at the time, he was under the impression that Hindu religion is not, in that sense, communalistic, it's much wider. But later, he was also disillusioned with Hindu religion also. Then he shifted, he shifted from here to there, like he took essences, he took the things from Sufism, from Vaishnava Dharma, from Baul, but he didn't strictly adhere to them as a practitioner. He took the essence of that and he assimilates it in his own way, which is reflected in his notion of Jibon Devata, Lord of Life. So he was spiritual. I agree with you. He was a spiritual person, not a religious person. And the same thing we find in Wittgenstein. In his life history, it's a transition from the religious to the spiritual. And he was also, like, we cannot tag him as a Jew or as a Catholic or as a Protestant, although his last rites had been maintained by his students in a particular manner. But in his writings, I could not find any particular um, like he is biased to any particular religious tradition. I could not find any reference to that. So in that way, they really had similarities. And what was your first question, Dr. Ghosh?
The
Please.
first question was on Wittgenstein. So can we just ascribe Wittgenstein as an atheist in the way we can ascribe it to Tagore? because
No,
you see,
I mean,
Tagore was a pantheist. That is what I was reiterating. That Tagore was a pantheist, and that is as you have mentioned the book Jivan Devata. It is coming from there. Now the thing is, one most important thing we have to find out whether Wittgenstein was against the binaries as the postmoderns are, because postmodernism and Tagore, they are coming closer to each other regarding their expressions on the Gitanjali and their views. But whether binaries are logical binaries, which we say, now whether those things, whether Tagore's view will be expressed, will be accepted to Wittgenstein or not. That is what we have to, because we are making an interface. So that is why whether Wittgenstein will agree on Tagore on this issue. This is what I was trying.
I just want to differ from your view of labeling Tagore as a pantheist. I'll not do that, and nor do I want to tag Wittgenstein as being an atheist or a pantheist. But there are references like I am my world, and all these pantheistic comments are there in the notebooks, and 2 or 3 are there in the Tractatus also. But this is a kind of this is different. This is kind of, there are nuances, like where he will say that solipsism is coincides with realism. So this pantheism is different from the usual pantheism that we usually find. And one thing I remember what Professor Pradhan was saying about truth. Like I could not elaborate, but in Tractatus also there is this hint of this truth. Truth as the transcendental truth, like truth. What the when he says that there is truth in solipsism, the world is my world. So this truth, here he uses the word die Wahrheit. That seems to me, I'm not sure, but that strikes me that it could be he also had some kind of notion of a truth which is transcendental, and on the factual level there are these truth operations, truth conditions, and these truth substitution instances, truth values. There he uses it truth in a different sense, in the factual sense, and he used truth in a different sense when he's talking about the truth of solipsism. So it seems that there is some germs in it.
I think you
And
can proceed further.
huh,
Yes.
Can I respond? Can I respond to Professor Ghosh's question
Yes, sir.
regarding God?
Yes, sir. Yes.
One thing is in the Tractatus, there is a sentence where Wittgenstein says God doesn't reveal himself in the world.
exactly.
So let us understand by this that God, if there is any, then it must be a transcendental God, and it cannot be a pantheistic God, where God is the same as the world. So otherwise, Wittgenstein would not have said God doesn't reveal himself in the world. So that's one thing. But in notebooks, there is a very strange phenomenon where he says God is the meaning of the world. The meaning of the world is not part of the world. Therefore, the meaning of the world will be transcendental. So God will be a transcendental truth. He doesn't deny God, but he has a different conception of God. He is not thinking of a
Exactly.
creator God. So therefore, it is not a Christian God in that sense. So God, the word God is an open concept. So he has invested meaning in that concept. So we should take it that way. He was not a pantheist. He was not an atheist, but he was accepting the truth of God's reality, which is a transcendental truth, which is a mystical truth. And so as Tagore is concerned, I cannot call him an atheist. If if he's an atheist, the whole Gitanjali will look like addressed to Nam. He's addressing this to the highest reality. He says to me, Amar, etc., etc. These are all personal epithets, but addressing to the divinity, the infinity. So in that sense, he is not an atheist in the ordinary sense of the term. Okay, this will be my response to that very important question which Professor Rose has raised.
Thank you, Professor Pradhan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Satyendra, then Professor Giri. Satyendra, please.
Good evening, ma'am, and thank you, Aryan, for giving me opportunity. My sincere regards to Pradhan sir. Really, it's an honor for
Thank
us.
you very much,
Yes,
Satyendra.
yes. Ma'am, you have quoted that ethics and aesthetics are one. Okay. According to Wittgenstein. And you also said that Rabindranath Tagore also supported this one. I have read Tagore man, and I think it is very clear in the context of Tagore. But one thing I would like to ask, I need more clarification that in ethics, our concern is largely practical issues. It may be human conduct and behavior. It may be in the sense a good right and good something like that one. But in aesthetics, especially in fine arts, we deal basically abstract notions. Okay. And that is the relation is like something concrete versus abstract. Ethics is, I'm saying largely, not all, ethics is largely concrete. It deals with some concrete issues, problems, and provides some solutions. Where aesthetics is largely abstract is notion. I need some more clarification, man. I shall be highly obliged.
Professor Sarkar, please unmute and do it
Sorry.
carefully. Yes.
Yes, I can share. I can see your worries that you want to say that ethics deals with action, and which evaluate either as good or bad, whereas aesthetics is more or less contemplation of an object as being pleasant or beautiful. So these two discourses are separate. Why does Wittgenstein think that they are the same? Your question is, you want to ask this.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Now,
yes.
now when he's saying is one and the same, ethics and aesthetics is one and the same, I think that he doesn't want to make it like that they are identical. He doesn't want to say this. Rather, he wanted to say that there are points of affinities and that there are points of connections. And in fact, in lecture on ethics, he was trying to give a definition of ethics. Then he was saying that it might include a part of aesthetic. It might be a general part of aesthetics. So this is clear from this lecture. It follows that he does not want to identify these two discourses completely, because one is a part, it might be an essential part, but still not the whole of it. So it's not the identity of these two discourses. Rather, he said that there are overlapping points which make them like he says the same, one and the same. And these overlapping things are, I found at least there are 5 points in the Tractatus. In the Tractatus, one thing, ethics and aesthetics, both are inexpressible, insensible language, because they do not talk anything, do not describe or picture any state of affairs. And again, he talked about a particular view, a different kind of view, viewing sub specie eterni, like viewing from eternity, which Spinoza used, but Wittgenstein also used, that if you look at the world from eternity, from sub specie eternity, then you will see that it is valuable. Then you can see the world in a right way. So then what is this viewing sub specie eternity? This is common to both ethics and aesthetics. Good life is something which is viewed, life is viewed sub specie eternity. He said that good life is that life where you renounce everything. Like if you ask for something, you don't get it, you feel frustrated. If you do not ask anything, if you renounce everything, then nothing can frustrate you. You live a happy life, you live a good life. So this you can lead if you view it from the point of view of eternity. Similarly, from the point of view of eternity, you can see something as beautiful as pleasant. And finally, another common thing which is present in both ethics and aesthetics, the wonder that the world exists. He says that the wonder that the world exists, this wonder is common in both ethics and aesthetics. But I'll not go into that because that will take another 30 minutes. At least I can, you can find it out. I'll give you the hints where these points are there. Okay.
Thank you. Now, Professor Andagiri. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Sarkar. It is so enriching. And thank you, Professor Pradhan, Professor Pranda, and all friends co-present. I used to share a couple of thoughts, and I'll be very brief within 1 to 2 minutes. Beginning with your reference to subspecies eternity, that also constitutes a point of understanding by bringing Spinoza, because Tagore was also a lover of Spinoza. It is in that light to understand the convergence between Tagore and Wittgenstein via art and poetry. We are also invited to bring a few other people, especially Tolstoy, because Tolstoy came to Wittgenstein as a saving grace. We must not forget that when Wittgenstein was trying to commit suicide, he just found Tolstoy's book. Therefore, the Tolstoyan dimension in Wittgenstein, and that also brings Gandhi to the picture, because to understand Wittgenstein and Tagore, we also need to bring other, possible interlocutors like Gandhi. Now, Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan wrote a book, The Philosophy of Rabindranath Tagore. So my query is that if we bring Radhakrishna's portrait of philosophy of Rabindranath Tagore, from that point of view, how do we understand Wittgenstein? Now, coming to your fundamental argument about scientific language being done in a particular way, for example, the exactitude of mathematical language. But when Wittgenstein was writing about science, there was already the quantum revolution. It seems he was really wedded to, rather bonded to a particular view of science. Now, if we look at science, not constrained by the way Wittgenstein portrayed science, then how do you understand the relationship between art and science? Because even in mathematics, if we bring Gödel's logic, the mathematical logic has a kind of inexactitude built into it. Therefore, my submission is that we must understand Tractatus now, not constrained by the way Wittgenstein approached science. And about sense and supersense, another question here is the notion of multi-species senses. As we know, we are being confronted with climate collapse now. Now, sense making, is it only confined to the human beings? One query is, in the context of limits of anthropocentrism, I think the limits of language and thought today must embrace the challenge of limits of anthropocentrism. It is in this context to understand the limits of sense itself. Shall we think about non-human senses like non-human animal senses? And finally, about Wittgenstein as a philosopher and Tagore as a non-philosopher, we must not forget that Wittgenstein himself was very critical of being labeled as philosopher. Towards the end of his life, he wanted to leave philosophy. And my final thought is about silence. Now, silence, is it static or there is a aspect of cultivation of silence? We know in Tagore it was animated by meditation. So therefore, in what way we can look at Wittgenstein, the whole dimension of cultivation of silence, and also the possible relationship between silence and shunya, the whole notion of a pregnant emptiness. Thank you for your kind consideration.
Uh, Let me try to recapitulate. If I miss, then please correct me. The first one you said about Tolstoy. I agree with you. I think some books also have been published. He was really influenced. It changed his life during the wartime, and his wartime diaries support that he was so much influenced by Tolstoy at that time. At that time, he was a good Christian. The stage did not last for long, but at that time he was really very fond of Tolstoy. And the second one, uh, even the sense. Uh, what was the second one?
The whole idea of sense now is it mainly anthropocentric sense?
Oh, this sense, which I distinguish between sense and nonsense, that is from Wittgenstein. It's the German word from Sinn. It in and two different senses. One is sinnlos and another is unseen. It's simply its meaning of a particular uh, sense. It's kind of significance, and the sense you are using, that anthropocentric sense in case of our environmental ethics. I agree with you, and because of that, this critique of as a critique of anthropocentrism, this biocentrism, ecocentrism, ecofeminism, these all movements have come here, but that has directly, as such, no connection with this scene or this sense. This is very particular and very peculiar to the sense of the Tractatus, account of language and meaning.
May I say something? May I say something?
Can I finish? Like,
Oh, okay.
What are your third one? Second.
About science, the whole idea of the scientific language is exact. But there was already quantum revolution by that time. So was Wittgenstein not aware of that? So how do we engage with the notion of scientific language as Tractatus, bringing a quantum view of science? And that would have much more affinity between science and art.
Yes, probably you're right. You're a good question, but like it's the language of science. Rather, he was he had aversion to the notion of progress, scientific progress and this technological advancement, progress due to technological advancement. Like I can refer to the preface of the book Philosophical Remarks. There he's expressing his anxiety about this progress, about this notion of progress by science and technology. And as far as scientific exactness is concerned, he had this impression that facts are, because facts are, what are the facts? Those who describe the world. So, what in general, very crudely, generally, you can think, what does science do? They deal with the facts of the world. So, in that way, fact is concerned with science. And the way, what you said about quantum mechanics, I agree that that comes to Tagore. Like when he talked about relationship and all that, right? But here, it's more in this level. You were saying scientific language is factual language. And is there anything more?
There are, but because of the paucity of time, so we can maybe continue later.
Okay, okay. Please,
I
please.
would like to say something.
Ah.
I'm Meera Chakravarti. I'm in Jain University Cultural Studies Department. When we talk of art, of course, we do not go to art for information. We go to art for experience. But if that experience is judged, uh, it is not, I think, necessary, perhaps, because there is a debate whether it should be judged or not. Because when you see, with due respects to all these great personalities, in Shakespeare there is this lot of evil, but he doesn't take sides about it. In Milton's Paradise Lost implies the moral by exploiting the Saturn, you know. So the distinction between moral art and moralizing art, there has to, it has to be. And Henry James was seeing a painting of Isabella, and the aesthetic value is coming first, but not the judgment. That realizing that the beauty of Dorian Gray is exploited by a bad man. So when truth and beauty combines, now what is that we'll have to also observe? That Nietzsche has said that art could be substitute for religion. Even if faith is lost, the art is there, said Nietzsche. Now, you go to poetry, therefore religion brings the aspect of the spiritual truth. And uh, art too has its own way of presenting things and not necessarily falsifying. Because when you see Dostoevsky, uh, do you say, how do you relate the art from the artist? Because he was a, sorry to say, debaucher, but his novels are full of ethical moral values. So this moralizing art and moral art, I think Tagore has a lot to say on this. I mean, he would not have this kind of judgment that is passed between. So, did you see that dimension of Tagore's art as the morality and the moralizing, the distinction between these two? Has he tried to bring out anything on that? Did you reflect on that part of it?
Ma'am, I don't know whether I really get you or not. Did you mean that when he is saying that good is beautiful or the beautiful is good, like when he is saying that, do you want to bring in the notion of normativity or morality here? Like I
I'm
think
asking this. Yeah, I'm asking this. Are you passing this judgment? Because when we see the artist, as I quoted the examples of Shakespeare and the Dostoevsky and others, I mean, they have a darker side in their personal lives, but their works are full of the ethical views and etc. So how do I'm trying to find out what is that kind of a status? How do we try to experience or express that? And
okay.
if I do if I try to say, okay, that is truth is beautiful, or as Kantian point, I mean, there's truth is beautiful, etc. Then they sublime, etc. Are we not passing a judgment? And I don't think Tagore passes a judgment. Tagore
No,
is not
it's
judgmental about it.
probably whatever what I understood, like it's a kind. There's a metaphysics in it. Like when he's saying good, it's not like we normally say honesty is the best policy. Tagore will say honesty is good, not for being the best, not for being a policy. It is good because it is good. It is good for the sake of it. It is good because of its surplus. We have to understand Tagore's notion of ethics and aesthetics through his notion of surplus. It's only human beings who have these surpluses.
I will beg to differ. I'll say that is he also, because I'm also Bengali, so he also said he had an anubhav, amar anubhav hoyeche. He says that he had experience. So this experiencing part of this spiritual experience, which is ineffable. You may not be able to express that in the language.
That is
and
something
the language falls short of expressing that. And he said, I don't have the Bengali section right now here. I got the information late by Ananta, so I can't give it. But he says, আমার এরকম একটা অনুভব হয়েছে যে আমি তাই জন্য বলতে পারি আমি ওটা অনুভব করেছি. So he had that experience because despite the death of his son and where he would say that he would have been morose or sad and all that, he tells us that, he writes, he said he had experienced a kind of a universal, kind of a feeling with the whole of the universe. So therefore that song, Aaj Jyosna Rate Shobai Gachi Bone, is so much in contextual, there. So that is why I was trying to say that this.
That is the experiencing is there. And
yes.
That experience is at the same time universal.
Yes, but not expressible. Not expressible in words.
That is ineffable. And this ineffability is common in Tagore and Wittgenstein.
In the art, I'm saying, in the art itself. If you see,
yes.
like the absurd art, the absurd painting may not have a representational value, but it will have a aesthetic value.
Yes,
it will have an aesthetic value.
Okay, madam. I think there are other few questions. Arunima, then Professor Samasri, then Purbayan. I think you all three can put the question and then madam would respond.
No, I don't have a question, Ranjan, because the discussion is going on regarding truth, beauty, and the ineffable. Okay. I have some suggestions. That is the question that was put by Professor Anand Giri and the previous lecture delivered by Professor Pradhan, and now excellent lecture by Professor Sarkar. I had some comments because we were all talking of beauty, and if we look in Radha Krishnan's an idealist view of life, he has already mentioned there that truth, beauty, goodness, they cannot be captured by science. So there is something more to science. And here Radhakrishnan was not averse to any technology or any scientific observations. But he said that in Bimal Krishna Motilal's edited book, the Centenary volume of Radhakrishnan, he has said that what is more, there must be something more to life. It is not only a scientific life that we are leading. So that kind of life which we try to get at, that is the meaning of life. And this one, which Professor Meera Chakraborty was now alluding to, is given by Tagore in his Hibbert lectures, which was later on published in The Religion of Man. And then he says here, truth is an infinite which is pursued by metaphysics, and fact is the infinite which is pursued by science. This is given by Tagore in his Hibbert lectures already, and which was being alluded to by Professor Sarkar already. And reality is the definition of the infinite, which relates truth to the person. So the infinite and the person, there is a kind of relation which Professor Sarkar has already said, and I think Professor Anand Giri was also referring to. That is what I was saying, that even in Radha Krishnan, in Bimal Motilal and Tagore's Ebert lectures, we find that there is something more than the scientific knowledge. So we are pursuing the meaning of life, and that kind of meaning of life we get in both Wittgenstein's lectures and in Tagore. I think that was my observation. Thank you.
Thank you, Samasri. Yeah, thank you very much. Now, Arunima and Purvayan, is Arunima there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Please.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
It was really a pleasure hearing you. It has always been. I'm actually a direct student of Professor Priyambada Sarkar. So, ma'am, I have just two questions. I'll put it very precisely. I'll try to put it very precisely because there's a paucity of time. Ma'am, when you say that ethics, aesthetics, religion, and even Tractatus, you stressed on that particularly, they all fall into a domain which is manifested but not said. Okay, it is not said, but it is manifested. And there were another comment you said that the extension of the world of language and the world of thought, I mean, they are the same. They are coextensive. When you say that the world of language and the world of thought are coextensive, I mean, I find somewhere some inconsistency here. Because when I say that something is manifested, then that is definitely a part of my thought. Unless and until it falls within my domain of thought, it is not manifested. But it is again not part of the language. So how can you make these two worlds of thought and language coextensive? So this is my question. My second question is that when you were interpreting the fact-value relation as, in terms of Wittgenstein, I mean, can I, or can we at all ascribe Wittgenstein to be a neo-naturalist philosopher? I mean, in the way that we are not determining or we are not deducing any one from the other, but we are definitely relating one to the other. So can he be ascribed as a neo-naturalist philosopher in any sense of the term? This is my second question. So these are two questions, ma'am, please.
Your first question is very good, logical, very logical. Yes, that is true. But I mentioned that thought and language are coextensive, where in the domain of the sensible. In the domain of the sensible, where you picture the world, then the limits of thought coincides with the limits of logic, language, and thought. So their limits all converge in the domain of the sensible. But here, ethics, aesthetics, religion, metaphysics, they are not in the domain of the sensible. They are something which is not stateable, but they show themselves. They show themselves via the facts only. Suppose you are angry with someone. What you can say? You can fight with him, you can abuse him, you can quarrel with him, and you maybe you do not say anything. You do not say anything to him. Now there are four ways. You can show your anger very well, even if you don't utter a single word, even if you do not throw a tantrum. That shows. It shows. So in that way, the world shows. Ethics, aesthetics, good living, everything, it shows. It manifests itself. In the language of Wittgenstein, it manifests itself. So this is your answer to your first question. And the second question, I don't exactly know the definition of neo-natural philosophy, but the way you said that they are distinct, but still they are related. If you want to see this as neo-natural, then you can do it. Then this is fine.
I think we go to Purbayan and Saji Varghese question. Please, Purbayan, are you there?
Yes. Thank you, Professor Ranjan Panda, for giving me an opportunity to actually what I'm going to say is out of some curiosity, and it's always a pleasure to listen to Professor Priyambada Sarkar, such an outstanding scholar of Wittgenstein's philosophy. What I would like to know from Professor Sarkar is that the poet's perception of truth and there is a philosopher's perception of truth, and these two actually this has been related by her in Wittgenstein and Tagore's writings. And we know that the perception of truth or truth may also change over a period of time, and through the structure of poetry, through the use of language, and there are poems which are symbolic in nature, and the structures of the poems also change, and we have seen in Tagore's poems also the change towards the later part of his life. And we see also in Wittgenstein that the relationship between language and reality, the way he perceives in the Tractatus, and the distinction between expressibility and ineffability, or what is being said and what could be shown but cannot be said. But later on, he has also moved on with his thinking in philosophical investigations. So, and we see in a poet's life also in Rabindranath Tagore and in many other poets that the use of rhythms. Earlier, the poets used rhythm and ornaments or alankara in their poetry more often or not. But later on, the structures are visibly being changed. So, are the perceptions actually being changed fundamentally, or the changes are inevitable, or can you relate this shift of perception to Wittgenstein's later philosophy also? Because this is what I have been curious about, knowing Wittgenstein's these two perceptions and Tagore also about the structure of poetry and about the philosophical writings. How do you perceive these changes? Could your thoughts be? Would you respond in the same way as you were dealing with the Tractatus when you will be dealing with philosophical investigations?
Professor Sarkar, I request you to take the other question who is in the maybe the similar line of thought. Saji Varghese would ask this question to you. Request Saji to please put the question directly. Saji, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Yeah,
Thank
please.
you very much. First of all, Professor Sarkar, it's wonderful listening to you. Thank you very much for a crystal clear, wonderful presentation on interface between Wittgenstein and Tagore. I have put my question in very precise manner in the chat box. Would your position differ between the interface that you have drawn if you were to include also philosophical investigations into the fold of Wittgenstein, vis-a-vis Gitanjali of Tagore? And somewhere you had referred to values, the ontological and the aesthetic, where you referred to values. My second inquiry is with regards to the values which Tagore had emphasized, and Bengal as a whole has emphasized was very humanistic and universal values. Was it in similar line which also Wittgenstein emphasized upon? Did the kind of values, because the world to which we and the Wittgenstein belonged were quite different. We were already in a colonial period, while Germany was not. So the kind of values, possibly the experience would have made them or compelled them through, could have been little different. But Tagore, in all through his poems, and also Gitanjali in particular, the values had always been that he had emphasized upon were very general, universal and humanistic, fundamentally humanistic. In its relation, did Wittgenstein also reflect upon the similar kind of values, or would it differ? This is my second inquiry. Thank you very much, madam. I relate it with philosophical investigation. I hope you would care to answer this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Saji, and thank you, Purbayan. Now, my first answer is no. I'll not extend this analogy to philosophical investigations. And like Wittgenstein, though not in a pronounced manner, I think Tagore also had this changes of perspectives. Early Tagore and the later Tagore. Like even this change at the time the modernist movement was coming, and it was there in literature. He was critiquing the modernist influences and art, poetry, etc. And he in fact informs also, he made changes. And there are interpreters differ in leveling. Interpreters differ in leveling the changes of Tagore. Like many term later Tagore as breaking with his earlier metaphysical self, and he's not a sage poet. In his later years, he rather lands us with uncertainties. He lands us with failures, frustrations, uncertainties. And he was experimenting with forms. He was experimenting with his drawings, paintings in his last phase of his work. And but somehow I feel that even in spite of the marked difference in later years, still he has some belief in this in the eternity of the good and the supreme one, something. And in philosophical investigations, Wittgenstein, this basic distinction between sense and nonsense, which is so dominant, which is the most fundamental thing in the Tractatus. He has what I should say, he rejected it. He said, we cannot really distinguish something as sensible for good as nonsensible for good, because something may be sensible from a certain perspective, from a certain context. It might be nonsensible from some other context. I can even draw the boundary of thought from some aspect. I can even draw a boundary on language from some aspect, from other aspect, the boundary doesn't stand. So I think he does away with this notion of sense, nonsense, limits. So this boundary, if the boundary is gone, the limit is gone, so the limits of language is gone. But still there is something. But whether that tallies with the Gitanjali, I doubt. I think if anyone wants to work on this, he or she can work on later philosophical investigations with the later writings of Tagore. It seems, I'm not sure. I have not researched thoroughly on it. So, and something Saji said, this is Purbayan and Saji's common question. And the second one, Saji said something about value. Yes. Yes. Wittgenstein also had had this strong sense of ethical conduct, and his notion of value, he was quite rigorous. He was quite rigorous in his talk, in his work, in his being. Like he said that he didn't want to go to this high table talks, because he used to think that Oxford, Cambridge philosophers, they're so pretentious. He doesn't feel like talking to them. Rather, it's better to talk to simple peasants or washermans in Norway or something, who will talk to their heart and who will have no pretensions. And he almost lived the life of a sannyasi. Like he donated all his contributions to poets, musicians, and others, and his siblings. And he used to live a very strict life. He didn't have any money. Still, he will not apply for a project, because in the project you'll have to write, I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll do that. He said, I've not done it, so I cannot write it. So he'll not ask for money. So in that way, as far as his own life is concerned, his own values are very high, and ethical conduct was really appreciable. Like in his confessions, he lied probably about his ancestries, and he was so repentant. He said so many times that I'm a liar, I didn't say the truth, because he was a young 7 or 8 years of age. He wanted to get admitted to a gymnasium, but this gymnasium would not allow anyone who are not of the Aryan origin. And he said that 3 of his grandparents were Jews, but he said that only 1 of his grandparents are Jews. So because of that lie, he used to repent throughout his life. So you can see what type of man he was.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I think we close the session, and it's time. I request Vikrant Singh to give a vote of thanks. Vikrant.
But Ranjan, we could not hear from you.
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
1 or 2 lines from you, please, if possible. We have still 3 minutes left.
Many things are said. And they are all experts in Wittgenstein. So I think, we will have a separate discussion altogether.
Okay.
Yeah. Vikrant, please.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So, on behalf of the Forum for Philosophy, we are really pleased to listen to Professor Priyambada Sarkar, and after the presentation, we had a very fascinating and profound, as well as quite multiple point of views were shared in the discussion, and so from behalf of we would like to thank our new attendees, especially Professor Charita Herat from University of Peradeniya, and Professor Meera Chakravarti from Jain University, as well as we would like to thank Professor Yasushi Maruyama, who is one of the international panelists who has agreed to be part of Wittgenstein Centenary Lecture Series on Tractatus, and earlier participant who is left the meeting unfortunately, Professor Gilad Nir. So the lecture was very fascinating, and uh, apart from the evidence related to the text, we find that there are a lot of similarities between the outlook of life, which both these our great influential thinkers of the 20th century, these Wittgenstein and uh, Rabindranath Tagore had shared, including their views on aesthetics, arts, which Priyambada ma'am kindly allowed us to witness here in this very clear and concise manner. So this was a very informative as well as quite profound and deep session of philosophy, as well as one can say that in these tough times of corona enforced solipsism, unfortunately, we have to be with our own best, make up our best means for survival, and re pursue the philosophical text. So this was a very nice way of looking at these two thinkers from a perspective of ethics, as well as autobiographical sense of living and meaning of life, which Somasri madam pointed out, that meaning of life is also important. So we are very happy and very pleased to have all of you here, and participate from so many different parts of the India as well as the world. And we really look forward to your presence, and solicit your attendance in the next meeting, which is on 9th November. Professor R.C. Pradhan sir will be discussing his new book, which is The Early Philosophy of Daya Krishna, on 9th November, and the chief guest will be.
Vikrant, it is 6th November.
Okay, sir. So sorry. So 6th November, we will have Professor Daniel Ravi from Tel Aviv University as the discussant, along with Professor R.C. Pradhan sir. So thank you all of us for spend this evening with us, and you back again.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Vikrant. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, leaving.
Yes. Asushi, thank you. You did not ask any question today.
Oh, well, I misunderstood the time.
Uh-huh.
Well, the time differences between India and Japan is 3 hours and 30 minutes, but I thought 4 hours.
But I think you were part of the major session. Most of the things you could get. Yeah.
Yeah, I learned a lot. Anyway, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you so much.
bye-bye.
Bye.